have our book. Can somebody grab me a tape measure out of the cabinet, please, and thank you. So we want to lay our blueprint out in front of us, and we want to turn to the page in our booklet. We've already done our seat pieces, so we want to look at the spot for our seat supports now, and then we want to find our seat supports on our plans, and we want to lay that out in front of us so that we're looking at both of them. So the first thing we need to do, I'm going to cut you guys a piece of wood that's going to be enough for your two pieces. All right, our finished length, if we look at our plan, is 26 1/4. So I'm going to cut you a piece that's probably anywhere from 54 to 55 inches. That way you have enough for a little bit of scrap too, and should be enough to cut both pieces. Okay, so first thing, we want to cut our stack to length. Before we can cut it, we obviously have to measure it. And let me say this too, sometimes you guys will get a piece that may be cracked like this on the end, or maybe it has some kind of jagged edge. Would it be a good idea to pull my first measurement from this end or from this end? From the clean end, right? That's already been cut, that's been squared off. So always pay attention to that when you guys start pulling your measurements. So let's measure that and mark it. Remember, we have to be 26 1/4. So I'm going to mark that, and then I'm going to put my X there. Why are we putting the X on there again? That way we know which side of the line we want to cut it on, right? So first step then, I've marked. I'm going to come over to, excuse me, bud. I'm going to come over to the miter saw right over here. And I'm going to do just like I did before. So I want to set my length stop. The first thing I need to do is I need to set up this piece so that my blade is touching the line that I made, but it's on the X side of the line. So I want to hold that nice and secure, bring my stop over, tighten that down, and then I'm ready to make my cut. So again, fingers 4 to 6 inches away, holding down, holding tight against the fence. Lower it all the way through my stock, and now, what's a good idea after I make this first cut? Measure. We need to measure it, right? So just double check real quick. Make sure that I have my 26 1/4. Yep, I'm right on. So, to cut my second piece then, remember we set this stop, so all we would have to do is just slide that second one over and make that second cut. Okay? So let's assume I have both my pieces cut. Now I'm going to come back to the table here, and I'm going to look at my booklet. So the next thing says to do what?
Plain thickness.
Plain thickness, 2 3/4. Let's just check real quick. Right now my thickness is 1 inch. So how much do I have to take off of this?
1/4.
1/4 of an inch, right? So let's go over to the planer, and I'm going to take my tape measure with me just so I can check it. Now I'm going to let you guys kind of set this up on your own this time. Remember, I've done it for you. I did it for all you guys the first time around. So let's remember, when we set up the original height on the planer, we want to use this little black tab here, and we want to set the height so this piece just barely slides under that black tab. If it doesn't slide under there, we need to lower it a little bit, but we don't want it to be too far down, because then it's not going to plane anything. So we get that set up right. We have both of our pieces. We're ready to make our first pass. Now, if we think about one full pass takes about 1/8 of an inch. So I've taken about 1/8 of an inch, so I'm probably going to need how many more passes? Just one more pass, right? So on this, 2 passes, after I make my first pass, I want to do one more full print clockwise, make my second pass. We want to double check, see what our thickness is. Right on, right? So, I'm right at 3/4 3/4. Let's assume that I did both of my pieces. Next step then, we're going to go back to our table. We're going to check our booklet, and we're going to see what the next step is. So, in your booklet it says lay out the starting points of the taper cuts. So all you're going to do for me is you're going to decide which end you want to pull that taper from, which end you want the seat pieces to lay on, and I just want you to measure and mark that 9.5 inches, so that's where my taper cut's going to go. So I'm just going to measure and mark both of my pieces, 9.5 inches, and then the next step says what? Have teacher make tapered cuts on the table saw. So, get with at least 4 to 5 people when you come over to the table saw to have your taper cuts made. That way, we can kind of make it a quicker process, and I'm not cutting one and then adjusting the fence and then cutting another. It's kind of like the planer. We want to get as many people as we can, because how many cuts do I have to make? How many taper cuts? I have to make 2 cuts, right? Because I have to cut it one way and then I have to flip it and use a different jig and make a second cut. Because if you look at this, there's 2 tapers on this piece. There's going to be one here, and then there's going to be a long one that's here. So in order to do that, we kind of have to set it up like the planer, where you guys had to kind of get in a line. I do everybody's first cut, and then you go to the back of the line, and then I do everybody's second cut, and then you're ready to come back and lay out your end cut. Okay, so let's go over to the table saw.
Right here.
You got it, man. So let's turn on the dust collector, just because the table saw makes a lot of dust. So, in order to make my taper cuts, I have these little jigs here that I use to make these cuts, and because we're going to be pushing stuff over the blade, I like to lift those guards up, and all you're going to do is you're going to hand me your pieces, and then you're going to go around to the back side, and when I push the pieces through the table saw, you're going to grab them and then go to the back of the line and get ready for your next operation, okay? Now, let me say this. When there's no guard on this blade, and the blade's spinning this way, where do you think it's a good idea to stay away from as far as where we're standing? I saw somebody back up over there. Joey, where do you want to stay away from?
Left and right.
Well, you don't want to be right in this path right here, right? Because what happens occasionally is these little scraps of wood that I end up cutting off, sometimes they'll catch this blade and they flip back like this, and they can land over here on the floor. I've even seen one hit the blade and fly up and hit the ceiling. So we just want to keep this area right here clear when I'm making these cuts, all right? You guys can stand over here, and also make sure when I make these cuts, you'll see that some scraps will kind of pile up here. Don't ever reach in here and try to grab these scraps, okay, as they pile up. Because what can happen is they'll all swing over and hit this blade, and then they'll take off and they'll rocket into space. I had a student last quarter that reached in and tried to flick these out of the way, and one of the pieces flipped up and hit me right in the forehead. So just keep hands off the table saw, right? I'll clear those away when we make our cuts, all right? So I'm all set up. I'm ready for my first taper cut. I'm using your 9.5 inch mark as my reference point. So when I'm ready, I'm gonna make my first cut. When it comes off, you can just grab it. In this case, I'm gonna have you hand it over. So everyone will get their first cut made. Then I'll make the adjustment for the second cut. And I use my second jig for that. And then I'm going to flip this around because I want to cut the other side. And now you've got both of your tapers made. Okay? So, both of your pieces need to have 2 cuts made on them. Now you can see if I flip anything against that, even with this blade coming to a stop, it's going to flip these pieces around. So that's why I want you guys just to stay back. The good idea is to stand off the end of the table again and just make sure there's nobody in this area, okay? So let's assume everybody had their taper cuts made. Let's go back to the table and we'll talk about one final layout that you need to do. So a good way to do this, notice we have one more cut here. It says lay out the 2" by 1/4 of an inch corner cuts. So a good way to do this is lay this down on the table right on your blueprint. If it helps, go get some more booklets and get some more blueprint pages so you can lay this out. You want to lay this out so that you're looking at this just like you see it here. All right? So you can see this angle cut that's here, that's the angle cut that I made. You want to lay that out on the table just like you see it, because that will show you what direction and what you need to measure to make that cut. All right, so we have to measure 2 inches back and we have to make a mark. So I'm going to take my tape measure, I'm going to measure back 2 inches and I'm going to make a little mark. And then it says I have to measure 1/4 of an inch down from the top. So I'm going to measure that and I'm going to make my mark. Now what I need to do is I need to connect those 2 points. So this is where a square or one of these rulers would come in handy. So we just want to lay that on there, edge to edge. And we want to draw that angle cut just like this. Now notice, this angle is going this way, and what angle is the one I just drew going on? Same direction, right? So it's very important that these 2 angles that you have are going the same direction. We don't want them going the opposite direction like this. So it's really important that you measure and mark this the right way, otherwise you'll end up with a backwards cut here, and then when you go to put your seat down, it's not going to lay flat on the ground like it would if you cut it the right way. So if you're wondering about this, what should you do? Just ask, right? Ask somebody at your table. If somebody at your table is unsure, then come ask me. It's just one question from being right or wrong, right? So let's make sure that we get it right before we cut. Once we cut this, can we go back? No. What ends up happening is if you measure, mark this, and cut it wrong, we have to get a piece of scrap wood, we have to glue it to the end, we have to sand it down, and then we have to recut it. And I don't think any of you want a glued piece on the end of this, right? So make sure you just double check before you go cut. Now, what I also want to identify is that's the scrap side of my line. So when I go to the bandsaw and cut this, I want to stay on the scrap side of my line, all right? So let's assume I've marked both of these. We're going to head over to the bandsaw now. Now, does anybody remember what this height setting needs to be on the roller guide?
1/4 of an inch.
Good, 1/4 of an inch. So if I bring it up here and it's way up like this, do I want to go ahead and start making my cut? No, no. That's a lot more than 1/4 of an inch, right? So we just loosen this little dial at the back and hold on to this when you loosen it, because if you don't, it can slide up and down like that and it'll slam down on your piece. So a good way to test this is I just want to put my pinky finger under there, and that gets us about 1/4 of an inch above the stock, and then I'm ready to cut. Remind me again why it's important that we're real close to our stock with these roller guides. Does anybody remember? Yes, sir. Yeah, protects it from the blade twisting. Everybody see these rollers here? And this blade is kind of in between those rollers. That's to protect that blade from twisting and breaking. All right, so it's important that these roller guides are as close to your stock as possible so that keeps that blade from twisting and binding. All right, so